The golden child is often imagined as the favored one, the child who receives praise, protection, and privilege within the narcissistic family system. But the truth is far more complex and far more painful. The golden child is not chosen because they are loved. They are chosen because they are useful. Their identity is manufactured, sculpted, and weaponized to uphold the family mythology. They are assigned a performance identity, a role that requires them to shine on command, to succeed on cue, and to embody the fantasy version of the family that the narcissistic parent wants the world to believe. From the outside, it looks like admiration. On the inside, it feels like captivity. The pedestal becomes a cage, and the spotlight becomes a surveillance system. The golden child learns early that love is conditional, that worth is transactional, and that their value is tied to how well they perform the script they never wrote. Many survivors describe the golden child role as a kind of emotional costume they were forced to wear. You learn to smile on cue, succeed on command, and hide any part of yourself that doesn't fit the family script. The pressure to be perfect becomes a quiet burden that follows you everywhere. Even into adulthood, you begin to lose sight of where the role ends and where you begin. And deep down, you know that the love you receive is tied to your performance, not who you are as an individual. The collapse usually begins the moment you start choosing yourself. It might happen when you set a boundary, speak up, or simply grow into your own identity. Suddenly, the warmth you were used to turns cold, and the praise you once received becomes criticism. Survivors often describe this shift as shocking because it reveals how fragile the family's approval truly was. This is the moment when the pedestal cracks and the role you played begins to fall apart. When the golden child stops performing, the family often reacts with confusion, anger, or blame. You may find yourself suddenly treated like the problem, even though you're simply trying to be honest or authentic. This is how many golden children end up in the scapegoat position, taking on the emotional weight the family refuses to face. The shift is painful because it exposes how conditional the family's affection always was. And in that moment, you realize you were never loved for who you were, only for the role you played. The emotional fallout of this collapse can feel overwhelming. Survivors often describe feeling lost, ashamed, or unsure of who they are without the role that defined them. You may question your worth, your memories, and even your instincts. The confusion is real because your identity was built around meeting someone else's expectations. When that structure falls apart, it leaves behind a silence that can feel both terrifying and strangely freeing. Many survivors experience a deep sense of shame during this transition, even though they've done nothing wrong. Shame grows in the spaces where authenticity was never allowed to exist. You may find yourself replaying old conversations, wondering what you could have done differently, even though the collapse was inevitable. Hypervigilance becomes a familiar companion as you try to anticipate emotional attacks or shifts in the family's behavior. This is the emotional residue of growing up in a system where safety was tied to performance. Healing from this dynamic requires tools that help you reconnect with yourself in gentle, grounded ways. One of the most powerful tools is narrative reframing, where you begin to tell your story from your own perspective instead of the family's version of events. Another essential tool is parts awareness, which helps you recognize the different emotional roles you played, the performer, the pleaser, the protector, and meet each one with compassion. And finally, somatic grounding helps your body learn what safety feels like, especially if you spent years living in emotional tension. These tools work together to help you rebuild a sense of self that isn't tied to a role. Narrative reframing allows you to reclaim your voice and your truth. When you begin to name what happened, not with blame, but with clarity, you start to loosen the grip that old roles had on your identity. You begin to see the difference between who you were told to be and who you are. This process can feel tender, but it's also deeply empowering. It's the first step toward writing a story that belongs to you. Parts awareness helps you understand the internal conflicts that often show up after the collapse. You may notice the part of you that still wants to please, the part that feels afraid, and the part that longs to be free. Instead of fighting these parts, you learn to listen to them with compassion. Each part carries a piece of your story, and each one deserves to be acknowledged. This gentle inner dialogue helps you rebuild trust within yourself. Somatic grounding brings your healing into the body, where so much of the tension and fear has been stored. Simple practices like deep breathing, grounding your feet, or placing a hand on your heart can help you reconnect with your sense of safety. These moments teach your nervous system that you no longer must perform to survive. Over time, your body begins to relax in a new way of being. And with each breath, you reclaim a little more of yourself. When the golden child collapses, it can feel like your entire world is falling apart. But in truth, it's the moment your real self finally begins to emerge. You are not the role you were forced to play, and you are not the expectations that were placed on your shoulders. As you move through this healing journey, I invite you to explore 3 critical questions that have guided many survivors back to themselves. What part of me was never allowed to exist? What did I have to perform to be loved? And who am I becoming now that I am free to choose my own identity? These questions are not just prompts, they are doorways to your emotional alchemy. And as you walk through them, you begin to build a life rooted in truth, grounded in self-compassion, and aligned with the person you were always meant to be. But every golden child eventually reaches a moment when the pedestal cracks. This collapse can be triggered by something as simple as setting a boundary, failing to perform, choosing independence, or defending the scapegoat. Sometimes the collapse begins when the golden child starts asking questions, or when they begin to see the narcissistic parent without the mask. Sometimes it happens when they are burned out from years of emotional labor, perfectionism, and pressure. And sometimes it happens when they simply grow up and develop a mind of their own. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. The golden child is no longer useful to the narcissistic system. Praise turns into punishment. The spotlight turns into interrogation. The pedestal becomes a trap door. And the golden child, once idealized, becomes the new target. This is the moment when the golden child collapses into the scapegoat role. Narcissistic families rotate roles because the roles are not based on truth. They are based on utility. When the golden child stops performing, the family needs a new villain, a new problem, a new emotional dumping ground, and suddenly the golden child finds themselves on the hot seat, accused of disloyalty, selfishness, ingratitude, or betrayal. Meanwhile, the original scapegoat may temporarily be redeemed, and not because the family has healed, but because the system needs a new sacrifice. This role reversal is shocking, destabilizing, and deeply confusing. The golden child who once upheld the family myth now becomes the threat to it. And the family responds with the same tactics they used on the scapegoat: blame, projection, gaslighting, and emotional exile. The psychological fallout of this collapse is profound. The golden child experiences identity fragmentation, a shattering of the self that occurs when the role they were forced to play no longer fits. But the real self has never been allowed to exist. Shame rises to the surface, not because they did something wrong, but because their entire sense of worth was built on conditional approval. Confusion sets in as they try to reconcile the sudden shift from praise to punishment. Cognitive dissonance becomes a daily battle. How can the people who once adored me now despise me? Hypervigilance develops as they try to anticipate the next emotional attack. And beneath it all is a quiet, aching question: who am I without the role? This is the emotional collapse, the moment when the gold mask cracks, the script burns, and the spotlight goes dark. This is where the 3-3-3 framework becomes essential. The first 3 points are simple but life-changing. You were conditioned, not chosen. Your worth is not tied to performance, and your identity is not a family role. These truths begin the process of emotional alchemy, the transformation of shame into self-compassion, confusion into clarity, and fragmentation into integration. The next 3 tools help rebuild the self: the Identity Reclamation Journal, where you explore the parts of you that were never allowed to exist; the Boundary Rehearsal Protocol, where you practice saying no without guilt; and the Emotional Alchemy Practice, where you learn to transmute fear into grounded presence. And finally, the 3 critical questions: what part of me was never allowed to exist? What did I have to perform to be loved? And what identity am I building now? These questions open the door to a new self, a self that is not defined by the narcissistic family system. In the world of Elea, the character who represents the emotional journey of survivors in your storytelling universe, the golden child collapse is symbolized by the moment she realizes the script she has been performing was never hers. She was praised for her brightness, her obedience, her perfection, but none of it reflected her true self. When her pedestal collapses, she experiences the same fragmentation, shame, and confusion that so many survivors face. But it is in this collapse that she discovers her real power. Without the script, she is free to write her own story. Without the mask, she is free to show her real face. Without the pedestal, she is free to stand on solid ground. Her collapse becomes her liberation. I invite you to watch my series entitled Unmasking the Architecture of Deception Case Files: Elea's Journey to learn more about Elea's incredible story. Growing up as the golden child often feels like being placed on a pedestal you never asked for. People assume it's a position of privilege, but survivors know it's really a role built on pressure, performance, and emotional sacrifice. You learn early that your value comes from how well you uphold the family's image, not from who you truly are. The praise feels warm at first, but it's conditional, and you can sense that it can be taken away at any moment. Over time, the pedestal becomes less like a place of honor and more like a place of captivity.
Fear, obligation, and guilt. These chains of OG trap you in toxic cycles, but you can break free. Embrace mindfulness and set healthy boundaries. Reclaim your autonomy.
The burden of a toxic family system is a silent, invasive weight, an unresolved history of pain that seeps into the wood of your daily life. To survive this environment, passive hope is insufficient. It requires a deliberate, structured strategy to separate yourself from the dysfunction. Today, you will build what we call the exit protocol, a physical 5-part framework designed to help you navigate the process of breaking away. Secure a quiet space right now. Open a blank notebook or a digital document and prepare to record each step of this framework. By writing this protocol down, you stop being a container for a family's trauma and begin the work of becoming the active author of your own story. Step 1 is mapping the manipulation. The abuser's primary goal is extracting narcissistic supply, the emotional energy they need to uphold a false self-image. You may see them weaponize their own difficult childhood, using their past pain as a shield to justify their present cruelty toward you. They may also use gaslighting to keep you disoriented, forcing you to focus on a sense of fabricated guilt rather than their behavior. Under the heading Step 1, Manipulation Map, list these tactics. Write down the 3 specific ways your family uses guilt to keep you trapped. Beside that list, write your primary anchoring phrase. A painful past is not an excuse for present abuse. Documenting these specific deceptions helps neutralize them. When you can name the tactic, you remove the abuser's ability to catch you off guard. Step 2 is strategizing the exit. Transitioning to no contact is a permanent lifestyle change aimed at reclaiming your personal power, not a temporary emotional reaction. On your protocol, list the specific names of the individuals you are establishing no contact boundaries with. Note the immediate friction points you need to create. This includes blocking phone numbers and locking down your social media profiles today. Because abusers often view boundaries as betrayals, they will likely test your resolve immediately. These digital and physical barriers are your necessary first line of defense. Defining these parameters in writing shifts your boundary from an abstract hope into a concrete, defensive perimeter. Step 3 is preparing for the system shift. A dysfunctional family functions like a rigid structure that relies on a scapegoat node to carry the weight of the system's toxicity. This diagram illustrates the structural crisis that occurs the moment the scapegoat removes themselves from that role. When you leave, the system compensates for the void by forcing the golden child node downward into that vacant, weight-bearing position to ensure the structure survives. Watch for flying monkeys, enablers sent by the family to guilt you into returning. They aren't trying to help you. They are trying to restore the structure's balance. Recognizing this systemic collapse helps protect you from false guilt. It confirms the family does not miss you. They miss the function you performed. Step 4 is reclaiming identity. Within a narcissistic system, you were assigned an emotional costume, a role you had to play to survive. We use parts awareness to identify these roles. It helps you see which parts of your personality were developed purely as survival mechanisms. List the survival roles you've played. These might include the performer, the role of the pleaser, or the protector. Now use narrative reframing. Cross out the false labels the family gave you and write down your own authentic truth in their place. Below that, write 1 sentence of compassion for these survival parts. Acknowledge the effort they made to keep you safe during the years you were trapped. By rewriting these labels, you begin to sever the emotional ties to the abuser's script and start defining yourself on your own terms. Step 5 addresses your biology. Your body will respond with anxiety. Like a clenched fist, your nervous system is braced for a threat. You can halt this panic response using somatic grounding, a set of physical actions to regulate your nervous system. Add these 3 actions to your protocol and perform them now. Place feet flat on the floor, put 1 hand on your heart, and take a deep, stabilizing breath. This physical routine tells your nervous system that you are safe. It signals to your body that performance and hypervigilance are no longer required for your survival. Take a moment to review the document you've constructed. This protocol is now your baseline, a concrete reference for identifying manipulation, enforcing your boundaries, and grounding yourself when you feel overwhelmed. Healing is a gradual process. The patterns of a lifetime won't be resolved in a day, and thriving requires continued practice and patience. But by putting these steps into practice, you are initiating the process of breaking the cycle. You are reclaiming the agency required to decide your own purpose, rather than existing to sustain someone else's false self-image.
Out of the shadows, breaking the cycle of narcissistic abuse. The systemic mechanics of intergenerational trauma and the biological imperative of going no contact. This is the path to growth and transformation. In the trap, the scapegoat endures identity hijacking and fog, fear, obligation, guilt. To escape, become the senior auditor. Reclaim your lineage with no contact. Write your epilogue. Shift from supply to the author of your story.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a wild, hidden reality about narcissistic family dynamics.
Let's dive right in, guys. Are the golden child and the scapegoat actually total opposites?
Well, at first glance, yeah. One's put on a huge pedestal, and the other gets punished.
But honestly, they're literally just two sides of the exact same traumatic coin.
Neither child can be their true self. Ultimately, they're both just treated like functional props.
The golden child quickly learns their worth depends entirely on upholding that perfect family image.
Meanwhile, the scapegoat, they act as a living container for all the family's hidden shame.
Which brings us to the core tragedy. Neither child actually gets true unconditional love. The golden child's praise requires total compliance. It's crazy. They have to succeed on command.
They're basically forced into an emotional costume, hiding anything that doesn't fit the script. Conversely, the scapegoat is systematically torn down, not for who they are, but for their assigned role.
So the result? Both kids are completely groomed to sacrifice who they truly are.
Now here's the absolute kicker. These supposedly opposite family roles are actually entirely interchangeable.
If the scapegoat cuts contact and leaves, the narcissistic parent still desperately needs a target.
So instantly, the golden child is thrown right into the scapegoat hot seat. Or if the golden child stops performing, all that conditional warmth just totally vanishes.
As you can see, both roles suffer a massive loss of identity to serve the family.
To actually break free, both survivors have to do the heavy lifting to reclaim their power. They use narrative reframing to separate their true self from that distorted, assigned family role. So I'll leave you with this. Are you ready to write a story that's truly yours?
Jack! Please stop it!
Wendy, I'm home.
Usually, when we talk about a classic horror movie, the scary part is supposed to be the ghosts, right?
Right.
Like, you picture the haunted hotel, the creepy twins in the hallway, the elevator full of blood. You sit on the couch, you cover your eyes, and you just tell yourself, it's okay, it's just a movie. Ghosts aren't real.
Exactly. We locate the monster completely outside of the normal human experience because, well, it feels safe.
Yeah, it feels safe. But looking at the stack of sources we have today, which is this wild range from trauma-informed film analysis to clinical psychology texts and even firsthand survival accounts, we're going to take a totally different perspective. Today, we are exploring the idea that if you are only paying attention to the ghosts in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, you are, entirely missing the actual horror story.
I mean, the superficial scares are really just a distraction from the insidious everyday terror that countless people actually live with behind closed doors.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for this deep dive today is to use The Shining as both a literal and a metaphorical roadmap. We want to explore the hidden architecture of narcissistic family dynamics and, the really grueling, heroic process of breaking intergenerational cycles. So we're putting a profound question on the table for you to consider today. What if the scariest monsters aren't spirits haunting a hotel, but the roles our own families force us to play?
It's a heavy question, And to answer that, we have to look past the surface level dysfunction. We're going to dig deeply into the mechanics.
Right.
Like, why are certain children targeted for abuse while others are praised? How does trauma physically alter our biology and transmit from one generation to the next? And ultimately, how do you dismantle that programming to finally break the cycle?
Well, to understand how someone gets trapped in a toxic family system, I think we have to start by looking at the environment itself. The sources we're pulling from today do something absolutely brilliant. They reframe the Overlook Hotel not as a haunted building, but as a massive architectural metaphor for an abusive home.
Yeah, think about the physical structure of the Overlook. On the outside, it is breathtakingly grand. It represents high society. It projects this flawless, impressive, wealthy image to the rest of the world.
It looks perfect.
Exactly. And in clinical terms, this mirrors a narcissistic family's absolute obsession with maintaining a false self-image. The narcissistic parent is deeply addicted to this pristine outward projection.
Because underneath all that arrogance is what? Just a profound well of toxic shame?
Yes, unaddressed, toxic shame, usually from their own childhoods. To shield themselves from feeling that shame, they construct an impenetrable, perfect, public facade. They demand that the family look like a postcard at all times.
It's like a stage play where everyone is desperately hitting their marks, just trying to convince the audience, the neighbors, the school teachers, the extended relatives, that they're the perfect happy family. The actors are smiling, the lighting is beautiful, but backstage is entirely engulfed in flames.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And if any cast member breaks character and exposes the fire, they are severely punished.
Yeah.
Because inside the hotel, inside the reality of the family home, it is rotting from within. It's isolating. And down in the basement, you have this massive boiler that is constantly running hot.
Constantly threatening to explode if it isn't perfectly managed.
Exactly.
That boiler is such a visceral representation of the volatile abuser. You're living in a place that looks like a palace to the outside world, but you are spending every waking moment managing the pressure gauge in the basement so it doesn't blow up and destroy you.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
And that brings us to the environment outside the hotel, because in a standard movie, a snowstorm is just a plot device, right? To keep the characters from driving away. But in the context of psychological abuse, that snowstorm serves a very deliberate purpose.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, abusive systems require closed loops to function. To maintain complete control and uphold that false self-image without interference, the abuser must physically and emotionally isolate their victims.
The snowstorm isn't just weather.
No, it represents deliberate social isolation. The abuser slowly cuts the family off from friends, supportive relatives, or, anyone who might point out that the environment is toxic.
The storm basically sends a clear psychological message to the victim. No one is coming to help you.
Precisely. You are entirely dependent on the person who is causing your pain.
Wow. Okay, so since the family is so obsessed with maintaining this theatrical production while trapped in this isolated environment, they need to cast specific characters to manage the internal chaos, right? The fire backstage has to be dealt with somehow, without letting the audience see the smoke. Let's talk about the two primary roles children are forced into, the scapegoat and the golden child. According to the clinical texts in our sources, the scapegoat is often referred to clinically as the identified patient.
Yes, the identified patient role. And it is a devastating position. In a family system that categorically refuses to acknowledge its own deep-seated dysfunction, all of that buried shame, the anger, the secrets, it has to go somewhere.
Because energy doesn't just vanish.
Exactly. So the family unconsciously selects one child to be the container for all of it. They project all their toxicity onto this specific child.
They just dump their dysfunction on them. And the terrifying part is the family genuinely believes the child is the problem.
They really do.
They purify themselves by pointing the finger at the scapegoat and saying, look, we would be a perfect family if it wasn't for this one difficult, rebellious kid.
And we have to examine the internal logic of the abuser here, because it explains why these systems are so difficult to dismantle. From the outside looking in, we see scapegoating as horrific emotional abuse.
Right.
But the abuser does not view it that way. The abuser views punishing the scapegoat as a righteous act. They genuinely believe they are fixing the family by policing the identified patient.
Oh, wow. So it's completely delusional.
It is a completely warped reality designed entirely to protect the parent's fragile, false self. By keeping the spotlight on the scapegoat's supposed flaws, the parent never has to look in the mirror.
Okay, so the scapegoat is catching all the heat. But then you have the golden child, the favorite. The one placed on what the sources call the pedestal of captivity. which, I mean, that sounds contradictory at first glance.
It sounds contradictory until you examine the mechanics of conditional love. The golden child isn't being loved for their authentic self.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're being praised for how well they wear the emotional costume the family designed for them.
So I want to push back on the traditional view here. What does this actually mean for the favorite? We tend to think the golden child has it easy, but is being the golden child actually just a different, quieter flavor of abuse, like being the favorite hostage?
Being the favorite hostage is a perfect description. The damage done to the golden child is profound, but it's invisible. Their praise is strictly tied to performance, getting perfect grades, agreeing with the abuser, looking immaculate.
Which has to breed intense perfectionism.
Intense perfectionism and a complete loss of identity. The moment they step out of line or set a healthy boundary or show any authentic individuality that contradicts the family's false image, that warmth violently turns to ice.
Wow.
Furthermore, the family ecosystem is fragile. It desperately requires a container for its toxicity.
Meaning, if the original scapegoat finally leaves, say they grow up and go completely no contact, the family system is suddenly left holding all its own poison. They lose their container.
Precisely. The system cannot tolerate holding its own shame, so they immediately cast a replacement, and very often the golden child is violently knocked off that pedestal of captivity and shoved directly into the scapegoat's hot seat.
Jeez. So no one is safe. You're just playing the role that keeps the boiler from exploding on any given day.
That's right.
If the environment is this volatile, how does surviving it actually alter a person's biology? Because we know the roles, but I want to dig into the actual physical and psychological toll.
It fundamentally alters the human nervous system. Returning to The Shining, pop culture treats Danny Torrance's ability, The Shining, like a magical superpower. He's just a psychic kid who can see the past and future.
Right.
But the trauma-informed analysis from our sources reframes this entirely.
They argue that Danny's shining isn't magic at all, it's hypervigilance.
Yes. When a child grows up in a volatile, unsafe environment where the adults are unpredictable, they don't develop telepathy. They develop a highly calibrated survival radar.
They learn to meticulously read microexpressions.
Exactly. They can tell by the specific sound of the key turning in the front door or the weight of a footstep on the floorboards exactly what kind of mood the abuser is in. It gives them precious seconds to hide or appease.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like having a car alarm system that is set so incredibly sensitively that a leaf falling a block away triggers a deafening siren. It keeps you safe from getting your car stolen, sure, but it completely destroys your peace. Your nervous system is constantly blaring. You can never, ever just relax.
And relaxing is biologically perceived as dangerous. And when the danger becomes too overwhelming for a child's mind to process, the brain has to find other, more extreme ways to protect itself.
Like Tony.
Yes. In the film, Danny interacts with Tony, the little boy who lives in his mouth, and warns him about things like room 237. Clinically speaking, Tony isn't a ghost possession. Tony is a dissociative coping mechanism.
When the parents completely fail to provide safety, the child's brain literally invents an inner protector to handle the terror.
It does. And that desperate need for safety and the warped ways we learn to connect in these environments can bleed into adulthood in deeply complex ways.
Right, like that case study in the sources.
Exactly. Our sources include a clinical case study discussing two therapists, Miguel and Larry, analyzing a client who was raised in this exact kind of narcissistic environment. In her own therapy, this client began overly idealizing Miguel, her therapist. She engaged in a psychological defense mechanism called splitting.
Let's pause there, because splitting is a term that gets thrown around a lot. What does that actually look like in real time for this client?
Splitting is an unconscious defense mechanism where the brain categorizes people or even entire situations into absolute terms, all good or all bad.
Because it's too much to process otherwise.
Right. It happens because the traumatized brain cannot handle the anxiety of nuance. For a child in an abusive home, recognizing that their caregiver is both the person who feeds them and the person who terrorizes them is too psychologically fracturing. So they split.
And in this case study, the adult client split her husband, viewing him as entirely malicious and all bad, while pouring excessive, suffocating praise onto her therapist, Miguel, viewing him as the flawless savior.
Yes.
I remember reading Miguel's reaction to this. He felt like he was just a fetish object, like she wasn't even seeing him as a human being.
She wasn't seeing him. She was attempting to recreate a primitive emotional fusion. The text describes it as her wanting to give away her skin.
Give away her skin. Wow.
Yeah. In her childhood, being used as an emotional container for a parent, fusing with them at the expense of her own distinct identity, was the only way she knew she existed. It was her only source of connection. She was just replaying the only script she had.
The psychological scars are so deep, but the sources also dive into epigenetics. This idea that trauma isn't just a memory, it literally alters gene expression. How does an emotional experience change our physical DNA?
It comes down to how our bodies process chronic stress. When you are in a constant state of hypervigilance, your body is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol.
Okay.
Over prolonged periods, this chemical flood can cause what's called DNA methylation. Essentially, chemical tags attach to your DNA and change how your genes are read.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they can turn certain genetic responses on or off, particularly those related to stress and inflammation. This means the trauma is chemically sitting on top of the genetic code.
So the body literally keeps the score. It explains why survivors are dealing with chronic migraines, intense brain fog, autoimmune issues, and severe social anxiety. Their physical nervous system is still trapped in the snowstorm at the Overlook Hotel, fighting a threat that might have ended a decade ago.
That's exactly it. And the tragedy of the narcissistic family system is that the abusive parent often feeds off this chaos. They thrive on the victim's energy and motion, their strong emotional reactions.
Oh, right.
By keeping the victim dysregulated, confused, and focused on the pain, the narcissist stays shielded from ever having to look at their own unresolved trauma.
So if the body is physically tracked in this hypervigilant state and staying in the system is destroying your biology, the only logical step is to leave. But how do you actually escape a system meticulously designed to trap you? Let's talk about Wendy Torrance, because her character maps the escape plan.
Looking at the film historically, Wendy Torrance is a deeply frustrating character for many audiences.
Yeah.
Critics and viewers have spent decades calling her weak, annoying, and passive. You watch her cry constantly, apologize when Jack screams at her for no reason, and you think, why don't you stand up to him? Why are you just taking this?
Wait, I have to challenge that completely. If we look at the clinical texts we're using today, walking on eggshells around a volatile abuser isn't passivity at all. It is highly calculated survival. The sources identify her behavior as anxious appeasement.
And that clinical reframing changes everything. Anxious appeasement is an exhausting form of emotional labor. Wendy is constantly monitoring Jack's moods and making herself small to de-escalate danger.
Right.
When she offers to make him coffee after he verbally abuses her, she isn't being weak. She's actively managing a live explosive to keep her child safe for one more hour.
It's akin to high-stakes bomb defusal. One wrong wire, one wrong tone of voice, and everything explodes. She is the one keeping the boiler from blowing. But the crucial moment for Wendy, and for many survivors navigating these dynamics, is when the switch finally flips. For Wendy, it's the moment Danny shows up with physical bruises on his neck.
Yes, the physical evidence of the danger shatters her cognitive dissonance. The illusion of the family unit is permanently broken.
The anxious appeasement stops dead. She locks Jack in the pantry, she grabs a baseball bat, she secures the snowcat. She's the one who actually executes the escape plan, while Jack is the one stumbling around, freezing in the maze of his own making.
Exactly.
She chooses the freezing, harsh reality over the comfortable, deadly illusion of the happy family.
And in real life, choosing that reality often means going no contact with the abusive family. It requires permanently taking off the rose-colored glasses. But anyone considering this needs to know it is not a magical instant fix. In fact, initially, the victim's anxiety usually spikes dramatically.
Which makes sense. You are stepping completely out of the only ecosystem you've ever known, even if that ecosystem was poisoning you. And the sources are very clear. The family does not let you just walk away quietly.
Not at all. Their false self-image utterly depends on having a container for their dysfunction. If you leave, their psychological survival is severely threatened. This is when the phenomenon of flying monkeys occurs.
Right, the enablers.
Yes, enablers, extended family members, or even family friends suddenly come out of the woodwork to guilt, shame, and pressure the victim back into the fold.
They send the text saying, but it's your mother, you only get one, or you're tearing the family apart over nothing.
Precisely. The narcissist will escalate their tactics, utilizing smear campaigns and diabolical manipulations to pull the victim back into the drama. This is why going no contact cannot be a one-time event you just cross off a list. It has to become a dedicated daily lifestyle.
You have to continuously, actively choose your own well-being over the demands of a toxic system. Okay, so you execute the escape plan, you survive the maze, you make it out into the snow, and you leave the hotel behind. But surviving the escape is only step one. How do you thaw out? How do you build a life that isn't entirely defined by the ghosts you left behind?
That is the arduous work of reclaiming yourself. Our sources offer several vital clinical tools for what we call the cycle breaker. The foundational tool is narrative reframing.
Meaning you start telling your story from your own perspective, not the warped script the family handed you. You stop saying, I was the difficult child, and you start stating the objective truth. I was the child who carried the family's burden.
Yes, it is taking your psychological power back through truth. The next tool is parts awareness. When you survive severe trauma, you develop specialized internal roles to cope, like the pleaser, the performer, the hypervigilant protector scanning for threats.
The car alarm we talked about earlier.
Yes, and traditionally, survivors feel deeply ashamed of those parts, or they try to brutally suppress them. Parts awareness means meeting those internal roles with deep compassion.
It makes me think of becoming the CEO of your own mind. You don't fire the pleaser or the protector just because their methods are outdated or getting in the way of your adult relationships.
Right.
You sit them down in your mental office. You thank them for keeping the company afloat during a massive, decades-long crisis. And then you give them a new, safer job description. You say, we aren't in danger anymore. You can finally rest.
What's fascinating here is that meeting in the CEO's office is clinically what we call neuroplasticity. You're actively rewiring the neural pathways that were formed in trauma.
Wow.
But cognitive understanding isn't enough on its own. To truly convince those parts they can rest, you must engage in somatic grounding. You have to teach your physical nervous system that the body is finally safe.
Because the body is still keeping the score, what does somatic grounding actually look like for someone trying to move that energy and motion out of their physical tissue?
It involves physical, targeted interventions. It could be somatic experiencing, where a therapist guides you to physically shake out the adrenaline that has been trapped in your muscles for years.
Okay, that makes sense.
It involves deep diaphragmatic breath work to signal to the vagus nerve that you are not under attack. It can even include therapies like EMDR, using bilateral eye movements to help the brain reprocess trapped traumatic memories so they are stored as past events rather than active current threats. You are literally moving the trauma out of your biology.
You are doing the physical work to realize that your life has a purpose beyond just being narcissistic supply for someone else. Which brings us to the tragic counterexample in all of this. Jack Torrance.
Yes, Jack represents the ultimate tragedy of the unbroken cycle. The clinical perspective suggests Jack was likely abused himself, but instead of doing the incredibly hard, painful work of narrative reframing and somatic grounding, he externalizes his pain.
Right.
He refuses to look inward. He refuses to break the cycle, and instead he becomes the exact monster he once feared. By choosing a different path, by going no contact, enduring the withdrawal and doing the physical healing work, the survivor is actively rewriting their genetic and psychological legacy. They are literally a cycle breaker.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive right now? It means that whether your family cast you as the scapegoat, forcing you to carry all the blame, or the golden child, trapping you on a pedestal of conditional love, those roles were entirely fictions. They were just psychological costumes designed to protect a broken system from having to look at itself. Stepping out of the hot seat, or actively climbing down from the pedestal, is the first, terrifying, necessary step to reclaiming your personal power.
Acknowledging that the path of the cycle breaker is arduous is vital. It requires grieving the family you deserved but never had. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
But is the ultimate act of courage. Refusing to pass down the pain, refusing to let the trauma alter the DNA of the next generation is a profound gift, not just to yourself, but to every generation that comes after you.
We spend so much time and energy planning how to escape the haunted hotel of our past. We analyze the boiler, we track the movements of the ghosts, we map out every twist and turn in the maze. But what happens when you finally break out? When you are finally standing in the quiet, freezing snow, completely free from the system, what if the real challenge, and the ultimate freedom, isn't just about surviving the family you left behind, but realizing you now have the terrifying, beautiful task of meeting yourself for the very first time, completely unscripted?
Okay? But this is the most important part of this whole thing. The story does not have to end there. You get to become the author. You get to write your own epilogue.
This is such a powerful way to reframe everything. If you recognize this pattern in your own life and you make the choice to stop it from continuing, you are not a victim. You are a cycle breaker. And that right there is something to truly celebrate. It's a massive act of courage.
So how do you actually do it? Well, first, you interrupt the legacy. You make a conscious choice every day not to pass on the pain. Then, you build a new foundation, a support base of people who actually see you and value you for who you are. You might even dig into your family's history, not to get stuck there, but to understand the secrets so they lose their power over you. And finally, you write your own story. You throw out the script they handed you, and you define your own life on your own terms. Just by choosing to break the cycle, you are already creating an incredible legacy of healing and resilience. So really, the only question left to ask is this: what will be the very first sentence of your new story?